Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Now, the CW has just debuted Black Lightning, which by my count is the 100th adaptation of a superhero comic. Something close to that, right? So I thought it would be a good time to take a look at Black Lightning's superhero past, specifically the 10th issue in his 1977 debut series. Now to do that, we're going to need to take a look at some Black superhero history. We'll take a quick look at the comic book itself for some of its quirks, and then we're going to analyze a very confusing and unique trope that I don't quite understand. Let's do it. The first thing worth looking at is Black Lightning's name. He has electricity powers, so the lightning part makes sense. But what is Black Lightning? That isn't a thing. No, instead, at this point in time, Marvel and DC just had a habit of taking the word black and putting it before the black superhero's name. And that's pretty strange. It doesn't really follow, because if we tried to apply that logic to other superheroes, people on the streets would be going like, oh, look up in the sky, that's White Spider-Man, or hey, cool, Asian Sunfire. And by the way, it actually wasn't that easy to find a Hispanic or Asian superhero that everybody knows that I could make that quick reference for. Anyway, DC and Marvel were putting the word black before a superhero name, but it actually wasn't as many superheroes as I originally thought. Here's the complete list of everybody that Marvel and DC did that for. Black Panther, Black Racer, Black Goliath, Black Lightning, Black Vulcan, Black Eagle, Blackwing. And none of those superheroes were created by a black writer, by the way. There were some early black artists in comic books like Matt Baker and Billy Graham, but the first writer for comics was Jefferson Pierce at Marvel, became an editor in 1979, and he was writing for them in 1982. I have action figures that are older than the comics written by black comics writers. DC tended to lag behind Marvel when it came to including more diversity in comics. Black Panther and Luke Cage were pretty well established at Marvel by the time DC launched its first comic starring a black hero, which was Black Lightning in 1977. Black Panther and Black Racer came first, and both were co-created by Jack Kirby, who grew up in a racially diverse part of New York City and always tried to include underrepresented sections of the population. A writer named Tony Isabella made a name for himself writing Luke Cage's early comics in the mid-70s, as well as turning Dr. Bill Foster into the superhero known as Black Goliath. Tony would go on to co-create Black Lightning for DC Comics along with black artist Trevor Von Eeden. So now it's 1977 and DC Comics decides, you know what, it's well past time for us to launch a superhero title starring a black superhero. So they approached Tony Isabella with a new idea that they wanted him to write. And the idea was not Black Lightning. Their idea was so much worse. This is so bad, and you're gonna think I'm joking, but this is real. Their real idea was a superhero called the Black Bomber. The idea behind it was that a white Vietnam veteran had come back from the war and he had been exposed to some sort of Agent Orange-like chemical which gave him superpowers, but he didn't know that. He would turn into a black superhero during times of crisis, but the two personalities didn't know that each other existed. So you had instances like stories where all of a sudden maybe a building is burning and there's some black people in there and the bigot is disgusted, but he turns into the Black Bomber, who just looked like a guy in like a basketball uniform apparently. Black Bomber would save them. He'd turn back into the bigot who would notice that these black people had been saved from a burning building, and he'd be like, ugh, disgusting. That was their idea for their first black superhero title. Tony Isabella takes a look at this. DC had already commissioned 2 scripts. They asked Tony to write the third, and he's like, I don't think your first black superhero should actually star a white guy. This would be like taking a white bigot like Bill O'Reilly and all of a sudden he can transform into Shaquille O'Neal when times are tough. It was just a really, really bad idea. Tony's like, you know what, let me pitch you something else, and that led to the creation of Black Lightning, fortunately. Black Lightning's original series was short-lived, just 1 year, but then Black Lightning joined Batman's team, The Outsiders, and he's been a DC mainstay ever since. We're going to take a look at issue number 10, which was the final issue written by Tony Isabella, and the reason for that is just bonkers. The first several pages of the story establish that the Flash's supervillain Trickster is being escorted to a trial across state lines in an airplane. The law enforcement eventually checks on him, only to find a dummy in the airplane, and they see him running outside the plane. We cut to Trickster, who thinks to himself about how this was all a ruse and how he used some of Mirror Master's image projectors so that he could parachute out of the cargo hold unnoticed. My favorite part of this is how large this bathroom is. If you've ever been on an airplane, you know how much of a challenge it is just to fit inside a bathroom, let alone set up an image projector and sneak outside. When the Trickster lands, he picks up that day's newspaper, which apparently was blowing through an empty field, and he decides to take a short break from crime to work at a circus that's coming through Metropolis's suicide slums section of town. We cut to Jefferson Pierce, the titular Black Lightning. He works as a teacher in a Metropolis high school, and his co-worker and love interest, Lynn Stewart, shows him the same newspaper Trickster just saw. The circus announces that Black Lightning will be part of the show. Now, one thing I find interesting about Black Lightning is that even if we set aside his work as a superhero, his civilian identity as a teacher gives him inherent ties to his community. His work as a teacher is already improving and bettering his community, and I think that that's inherently interesting. So his civilian identity has plenty of cool stuff going on. And when you look at a lot of superheroes, they're either rich or they work in journalism, and that makes sense to tie in how they get their job as a superhero done. But I really do appreciate what Black Lightning has set up. It's very different. I'm not saying that I want every superhero out there to have a unique job like a donut baker, but having ties to your community, I think that that's a really cool, unique, impressive move. Another cool move is Black Lightning has told Lynn about his secret identity. I actually wish more superheroes did this, sharing their identity with their closest loved ones and friends. It makes sense to hide your identity to protect your loved ones from supervillains, but I don't understand why you couldn't tell them. And when you do tell them, it gives you a bigger cast to work with. It lets the superhero bounce his or her concerns off of those around him, and it brings those supporting characters into the main story. You see it a lot these days with superhero TV shows. And I think more and more comics are leaning in that direction, that feels just a little more believable and plausible that they would tell a few people. Back in the 70s, wasn't much of a thing, so Black Lightning was an outlier there. If you've seen the CW's new live-action take on things, it features an older version of Black Lightning, closer to where he is now in the comics. On the show, he has 2 daughters, and Lynn is his ex-wife, but they're close to reconciliation. The daughters didn't debut until 1996 and 2003, so at this point, Jefferson Pierce is much younger, but has returned to the town he grew up in after competing in decathlons and getting his degree in education. On the show, he's now principal and has decided to return to being Black Lightning after deciding to stop 9 years ago. Back to the comics, Jefferson suits up, and this component has fallen by the wayside. He used to put on a mask that included an afro wig to better disguise himself. It is a bit dated, but it also seems like it's a pretty good idea, because if I saw Superman flying around with cornrows in his hair, I'd suspect Clark Kent a lot less. We cut to the circus where the ringmaster is stressed out over an incredibly convoluted plot point. Basically, a rich sultan gifted him with a massive diamond because he loved the circus so much, and then insisted he show it before every show. The ringmaster is completely stressed out about it being stolen, so he's hired a private security firm to guard it. The leader of the security firm is Barbara Hanna, and if that name sounds familiar, just give me a moment to set things up. So Barbara Hanna has hired a really dumb ex-football player to dress up as a version of Black Lightning to keep potential thieves away. And we get to hear her inner thoughts, which reveal she plans to steal the gem herself. Now this is a lot to break down, so bear with me. That character of Barbara Hanna is a not too subtle play on Hanna-Barbera. Hanna-Barbera at this point in time was making the Super Friends cartoon, and they had created a knockoff of Black Lightning called Black Vulcan. Now, why did they do that? Basically, DC didn't want to pay Tony Isabella a royalty for using his character. He had created Black Lightning, he was entitled to a royalty, so DC just let Hanna-Barbera create their own knockoff. So Tony wrote his final issue of Black Lightning complaining about this by having Barbara Hanna introduce a knockoff Black Lightning. I'm still stunned that DC actually published this. However, in Tony's excitement to diss Hanna-Barbera, I'm not sure his overall plot makes complete sense. How did this ringmaster even find this protection agency if they're basically fake? Was it because she had Black Lightning? I suppose that's just how things worked before people gave reviews on Yelp. But this guy, Jocko, who is dressing up as Black Lightning, is so dumb he admits he accidentally tackled his own quarterback. That actually sounds like he's had a few too many concussions. Oh well, this is the same circus that has also hired Trickster, who didn't even bother to make a different costume, so I guess it's just a dumb but lucky circus. The circus begins and Trickster instantly steals the diamond, setting off chaos. The real Black Lightning attacks Trickster, but is eventually subdued by some sort of glue bomb. The Trickster scares an elephant that charges Black Lightning. But the imposter Black Lightning isn't a bad guy, and he tackles the elephant just enough to divert Black Lightning from getting hit. Trickster is running away with the diamond, but Black Lightning uses his old decathlon skills to hurl the imposter's shield and make Trickster fall. Inspector Henderson shows up and arrests Trickster, as well as Barbara Hanna, although I'm still not clear on how anyone knows about her plan. To his credit, Black Lightning does not implicate the imposter and says he understands the guy was just taking a job dressing up as him, which isn't really a crime. So that ends the story, and that was the final issue written by Tony Isabella. There was one more issue, but then Black Lightning fell victim to the DC Implosion. Now, the DC Implosion of 1978 was a set of circumstances where Marvel was really beating DC at the time, and all of a sudden DC canceled about 20 of their titles. Very abruptly, they had to consolidate. So even though there was one more issue of Black Lightning published, I think Denny O'Neil filled in as writer, it was a pretty easy decision for DC to give that book the axe without its original creator. So we missed two tropes that were common in Black Lightning's comics. One was his friend Gamby, who was a confidant and a tailor who created Black Lightning's costume. In the early issues, it was implied that the powers came from the suit, but that was later retconned to say that Jefferson was just born with these metahuman powers. And I think having a tailor as a friend would be a huge benefit for any superhero. The other thing that regularly popped up in the comic was a poem that was said to be written by Jefferson Pierce. It read, "Justice, like lightning, should ever appear. To some men hope, to other men fear." This is actually a slightly more hopeful version of poet Thomas Randolph's version, which read, "Justice like lightning should ever appear. To few men ruin, but to all men fear." Personally, I like the comic book version better. But there's still one more trope that I want to address that I don't really understand, and that is there are a lot of black superheroes that have lightning powers. We have Black Lightning, his daughter Lightning, and his knockoff Black Vulcan. We have Storm, Juice, Static, and Shango the Thunderer. The Miles Morales version of Spider-Man has an electric venom blast. And Mark Waid's character Volt from Irredeemables actually comments on how cliche it is for a black superhero to have these powers. If we include black characters that use electricity to power themselves, we move into characters like War Machine and Cyborg. That's enough to make this a trope, but where does it come from? What's its basis? I don't really know. I've tried to look into older mythology or something like that to give me an idea of where this idea of black superheroes with electricity powers came from. Could it be a coincidence? Maybe. But it doesn't really feel like it. It feels like there's got to be some sort of cultural element there that I'm not picking up on. So anyway, that's a trope that I don't understand, and I'm guessing I should sort of be punished for that by taking a blast of Black Lightning's powers. I'm pretty nervous about this, but what the heck? Here we go. Ah! Oh my gosh. Oh, my muscles are tightening up. Okay. That was intense. Oh my gosh. All right. I did it. Now I will never not figure out a trope again. I'm not ever doing that again. Don't do that to yourself. Folks, thank you very much for watching. And until next week, keep reading comics.
Comic tropes. Comic tropes.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Is that gonna leave a mark? Oh. Whew, yeah, a little red. Whew. Oh. That was intense.